Hello and welcome. Find a comfortable place, settle in, and allow the world outside to fade away. There is nothing for you to do right now but to breathe and to listen. We're about to travel back in time, not with the noise of a history lesson, but with the quiet whisper of a story. A story of a life lived long ago, in a world of stone castles and shifting allegiances. It's a tale that reminds us that behind the grand tapestries of history, there are always real human hearts. So, close your eyes if you wish, and let your mind drift back to the close of the 14th century. History is not always written in ink. Sometimes it is written in blood, and sometimes in the silent tears of a child. In the great halls of power, people are not always people. They are symbols. They are pawns. And in the autumn of 1396, no pawn was more valuable than a 7-year-old girl whose destiny was to bind together two kingdoms torn apart by war. This is the story of Isabella of Valois, the child queen of England. A life lived at the crossroads of ambition, madness, and duty. A story that forces us to ask what price is paid for peace and who is made to pay it. To understand Isabella's extraordinary journey, we must first enter the world she was born into, the France of the late 14th century. She was born on the 9th of November 1389 in the opulent Louvre Palace, the daughter of King Charles VI. But this was no fairy tale. The palace, though filled with luxury, was a gilded cage stained by tragedy. Her father, the king, was known across Europe as Charles the Mad. His mind was a fractured kingdom, prone to terrifying episodes. One day he might be a lucid and loving monarch, the next a terrified man who didn't recognize his own family, or who believed he was made of glass, fearing the slightest touch would shatter him into pieces. Imagine little Isabella's world, a world where a father's love was unpredictable, where the power of the realm rested on a fragile mind. Servants learned to spirit the children away when the king suffered one of his absences, but the fear and confusion could not be so easily hidden. Her mother, the formidable Isabella of Bavaria, fought to keep the kingdom afloat, but even she saw her children not just with love, but with the cool calculus of diplomacy. She knew her beautiful eldest daughter, Isabella, was a golden key, capable of opening a door that had been locked for decades. That door was peace with England. For nearly 60 years, the 100 Years' War had been an open wound in the heart of Europe. Entire generations had been born and had died under the shadow of conflict. France was scarred by English raids. England was drowning in the depths of war. Both kingdoms were exhausted. By the 1990s, the desire for peace was a desperate whisper in both courts. But a peace treaty written on parchment was fragile. They needed a bond of flesh and blood, a sacred tie that would be harder to break. And so the name of a 6-year-old girl began to be spoken in secret negotiation rooms. The proposal was audacious, almost unthinkable. They offered their princess, Isabella, in marriage to the King of England. Richard II, a man of 29, was still mourning his first wife, Anne of Bohemia, whom he had truly loved. He had no heir, and his counselors pressed him to remarry. The offer was tempting. It included a colossal dowry of 800,000 francs and, most importantly, a 28-year truce. But there was one problem that even medieval customs could not easily overlook. Isabella was only a child. Yet the French diplomats, with incredible cunning, framed her youth as an advantage. She would grow up in the English court, learning its ways, becoming a living bridge between the two realms. Not a foreign queen, but one of their own. Richard, a king known for his sensitivity and love of the arts, was intrigued. When he was shown a miniature portrait of the princess, chroniclers say his expression softened. Perhaps he saw in her not just a political alliance, but the chance to guide and protect, to be a father figure to a child taken from her home. The treaty was signed. Isabella's fate was sealed with wax and ribbon. In Paris, as seamstresses stitched a trousseau fit for a queen and tutors taught her phrases in a language that sounded strange to her ears, Isabella played with her dolls. She was told she would marry a powerful king across the sea, but to a 6-year-old, that was as real as the dragons in her bedtime stories. The wedding was held in 2 parts, a reflection of its diplomatic complexity. The first in Calais, English territory on French soil, in October of 1396. Isabella, just 7 years old, walked to the altar in a gown so heavy with pearls and gold thread she could barely move. Her new husband, King Richard, knelt to meet her gaze, taking her tiny hand in his. A year later came the grand coronation in Westminster Abbey. London swelled with crowds. The curiosity to see the little queen was so intense that several people were reportedly crushed to death in the throng. Isabella processed through the streets in a litter decorated with the symbols of both kingdoms, the English rose and the French fleur-de-lis. She wore a custom-made crown and waved to the crowds as she had been taught. The coronation feast lasted for 3 days, a display of power and celebration. But as the nobles toasted the future, the wiser courtiers watched and wondered how long this peace, built on the shoulders of a child, could possibly last. For a time, however, Isabella's life was peaceful. Richard installed her in her own apartments at the Palace of Westminster, surrounded by both French and English ladies-in-waiting. The king proved to be a devoted guardian. He visited her often, bringing her gifts, rare books, exotic birds, musical instruments. He enjoyed her company, and she, in turn, came to see him with a mixture of affection and formal respect. He was the anchor in her new world. She found friendship among the other noble children of the court, especially in Margaret Holland, the king's niece, who was only 2 years older. It was Margaret who taught her English children's games, who explained the complex loyalties of the noble families, and who warned her in whispers of the tensions that simmered beneath the court's polished surface. "Why do the lords watch each other so?" Isabella once asked her. In France, there are quarrels, but here it feels like everyone is waiting for something. Margaret explained that Richard's reign had been filled with conflict with his nobility. Many saw him as weak for seeking peace instead of conquest. "Your marriage makes him stronger," she said, "but it is also a test for his enemies." Isabella absorbed these lessons. She began to see the court not as a home, but as a stage. She learned to read the glances, to notice the silences, to understand that even the most trivial conversations could have a political subtext. The years passed. The child grew into an intelligent, observant young girl. Her English became fluent, and the cold stone walls of Westminster became her home. The king insisted on her comprehensive education in history, geography, and politics. She would kneel over great maps, tracing the coastlines of France and England with her finger, understanding that she herself was that small strip of water between them, a bridge, but also a potential barrier. But bridges can be burned.
In early 1399, when Isabella was 9, the atmosphere at court changed. The air grew heavy with secrets. Her ladies-in-waiting exchanged worried glances. Richard himself grew distant, his visits ceasing. The stability she had known was crumbling. The crisis arrived in the form of the king's cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, whom Richard had exiled. Henry returned to England with an army, claiming he only came to reclaim his inheritance, but his ambitions were far greater. The disaffected nobles, who had long resented Richard's rule, flocked to his banner. One evening, Margaret Holland burst into Isabella's chambers, her face pale with fear. "We are leaving for the Tower of London, a palace and a prison." Isabella understood what it meant. Her journey through the city's dark streets was not a royal procession, but a fugitive's escape. At the Tower, her comfortable apartments had bars on the windows. For the first time since arriving in England, she felt truly a prisoner. Richard visited her once last. The confident, kindly king was gone, replaced by a haunted, defeated man. "I am afraid," he said, kneeling before her, "that I can no longer protect you." For the first time, he spoke to her not as a child, but as a political equal. He explained that Henry was claiming the throne, that his allies had abandoned him. "What will happen to me?" Isabella asked, with a composure that defied her 9 years. "I do not know," he admitted honestly, and in that uncertainty lay the terror. Her value was no longer as a symbol of peace, but as a bargaining chip in the hands of England's new power. A few weeks later, soldiers wearing the livery of Henry Bolingbroke entered her chambers. Behind them was Henry himself, now King Henry IV of England. Isabella curtsied, as she had been taught to do before a king. "What has become of the king?" she asked directly.
"Richard of Bordeaux is no longer king," Henry replied, denying him his royal title. "He has abdicated." Isabella knew abdicated was a kind word for overthrown. Her fate now hung in the balance. Some of Henry's counselors wanted to send her back to France immediately. Others argued to keep her as a hostage. Meanwhile, news arrived from Pontefract Castle. Richard II was dead, murdered. Isabella, who had never loved him as a wife, wept for the man who had been her protector, her only friend in this strange land. His death left her utterly alone and vulnerable. Finally, Henry's government gave her an ultimatum. She could return to France, but only if she acknowledged Henry as the rightful king. At 10 years old, she was being asked to validate the man who had overthrown and murdered her husband. The decision was made by her father, who, in a moment of lucidity, demanded her daughter's return. In the summer of 1401, 11-year-old Isabella of Valois sailed back to France. She left behind a crown, a grave, and 5 years of her life. She was returning to her homeland, but she was no longer the same child who had left. She spoke French with a slight English accent, and she carried within her a bitter wisdom and an understanding of politics that no lesson could ever have taught. Her return to France was complex. Her father barely recognized her. Her mother welcomed her with affection, but also with a calculating eye, seeing how she could use her widowed daughter's experience and status. Isabella found herself caught between two worlds, loyal to France by birth, but bound by experience to England. Her future remained uncertain until 1406. It was then that a marriage proposal arrived from her cousin, Charles, the Duke of Orleans. He was a man known for his intelligence, his passion for poetry, and his courage.
He was 29, the same age Richard had been. But now, at 16, Isabella was no longer a child. Charles saw her not as a chess piece, but the woman she had become. "I do not seek to marry the former Queen of England," he told her. "I seek to marry Isabella of Valois, the remarkable woman who survived it all." In him, Isabella found something she had never known, a partnership of equals and a genuine love. Her wedding in the Cathedral of Notre Dame was a true celebration. She became the Duchess of Orléans, and the following years were the happiest of her life. Her port became a center of culture. She became a patron of the arts, but also a shrewd political advisor to her husband. In 1407, she gave birth to a daughter, Jeanne. To hold her in her arms was a quiet victory over the fate that had been forced upon her. This child, she vowed, would know a childhood free from treaties and thrones. But tragedy was never far in 15th century France. The country was sliding into civil war between her husband's faction, the Orleanists, and the rival Burgundians. Her happiness was a brief, beautiful light in an era of growing darkness. Her health, never robust, was weakened by childbirth. After the birth of her third child in 1409, she fell gravely ill. The doctors could do nothing. The same constitution that had survived emotional and political trauma could not withstand the frailty of the body. Isabella of Valois died on the 13th of September, 1409. She was just 20 years old. She had been the queen of one kingdom and the duchess of another. She had been a symbol of peace, a political prisoner, a beloved wife, and a mother. Her life was a microcosm of her age, brutal, short, and dictated by forces beyond her control. Yet within those constraints, she forged her own identity, showing an intelligence and resilience that history should never forget. The little girl who was sold for peace became a woman who fought for happiness and found it, even if for far too short a time. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the life of Isabella of Valois. Her story is a quiet but powerful reminder that behind the grand names and dates of history, there are real human beings with hopes, fears, and an incredible capacity to endure the unendurable. I hope this story has given you a moment of peace and reflection. Until our next journey into the past, rest well.